Wrocław is a city located in southwestern Poland in the Lower Silesia region. Over 500,000 people live here. It's a city of gnomes. No, not those living in the woods, but rather those made of bronze. There is over 500 of them here, scattered all over the city. Some of them are easy to find, and some, well, you have to look up sometimes. They used to be a symbol of so-called Orange Alternative, kind of resistance movement aimed against the communist regime. In the 1980s, you could spot them painted on the walls here and there. They are an inseparable part of the city today. They're often found in places you wouldn't expect to find a gnome. They use computers, ATMs, and even play sports. This is Wrocław. I was born here, and although life drove me overseas, I'm proud that I can call Wrocław my city. And who is this? It's another gnome, of course. This little one lives in the market square. Many tourists visit this place, so this gnome was named Wrocław. An interesting play on words, isn't it? Wrocław's Market Square is a place full of history. The city hall is over 700 years old. It survived the World War II, but like the rest of the city, it too has paid the price of the turmoil of war. Its clock is an interesting design, solar and mechanical. The reliefs around the building tell the human stories, such as this one. You can see a wife and a husband here. He comes home drunk, and she is already waiting for him with a shoe in her hand. This small nook, called Jatki, used to be a home of butchers, craftsmen and merchants. It's commemorated with bronze animal carvings. Today, this place is a unique tourist attraction as well as a gathering place for artists of Wrocław. Świdnicka Street is a popular shopping arcade. Often you can see here the souvenir sellers in their booths. And these gnomes keep them company. These two are called the Sisyphus gnomes. The City Hall and the Market Square are one of the older historic places in Wrocław, though not the oldest. The history of the city goes back to the times of the Roman-style architecture, with its heavy, thick walls and small windows. In the 1950s, the renovation works were carried out near the University of Wrocław. During this work, fragments of walls dating back to the 10th century were found. This column, built into the wall, is from that era. Another example of the 10th century Wrocław is the Church of St. Martin. At first, it was a wooden church when it was built around the year 1100. 200 years later, little was left of the original construction. Heavy and thick Romanesque style was still popular, so a red brick church was built here. The windows are a bit more slender and taller than a typical Romanesque architecture. I guess the Gothic style was already gaining popularity at that time. Crazy 1300s, am I right? And this is the Church of St. Giles. Built in 1210, this structure has survived for centuries. Look at these massive, thick walls. It's a tiny hamlet, but it remembers the times of the first inhabitants of Wrocław. Next to it, the Museum of the Archdiocese of Wrocław. This inconspicuous building hides a national treasure. All Poles know about the first sentence written in the Polish language in a book of Henry. The book was initially written as a list of monastic properties in Henryków, some 60 kilometers south of Wrocław. It was written in Latin, but a sentence in the Polish language was placed there. It was a quote from the life of a farmer family. A husband said to his wife, "Ja tu pobruszu, a ty počivaj," which means, "I will work here, and you can rest. This entry is the only known fragment of written Polish from the 11th century. The Book of Henry is in this building behind me. I couldn't see the original. It's taken out of the vault only for special occasions. However, I went on a trip to Henryków where I could see a replica of the book in the Cistercian monastery. In the park outside, I found a granite replica of the book. The Wrocław Cathedral is a pearl of Gothic architecture, but its history dates back to the 10th century. The oldest underground discoveries date back to this period. Of course, the first building here was a heavy Romanesque church. Very little of it survived, except for some stone columns. They're now built into the western doorway of the cathedral. When the Gothic style captivated everyone, Wrocław accepted it on a grand scale. The Stanislaus Tolpa Park is a place where I've spent countless hours of my childhood. and next to it there is St. Michael's Church. I live nearby. In 1526, Wrocław and the Kingdom of Bohemia were incorporated into the Habsburg monarchy. For the next 500 years, it was in German hands. Still, the city never forgot its past. It was friendly and accepting to both Polish and German-speaking nations. In the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, the German hosts of Wrocław regulated the banks of the Oder River and prepared the city for its capricious nature. Wrocław tenement houses are the classic architecture of those times. They serve the people of Wrocław to this day. Many streets in Wrocław still have stone surfaces, but they're not rough cobblestone. These surfaces are smooth and more durable than today's asphalt or concrete. The 20th century brought new concepts in architecture. This bridge, opened in 1910, is a pride of the city. The era of the 1930s brought grand and sometimes pompous designs. A few of these buildings are still in use, such as this government office. The regional police headquarters has survived the war practically untouched. The Century Hall, known in the times of the socialism as People's Hall, was an object erected in 1913 for the Centennial Exhibition. These types of expos were popular at that time. The new technologies of the era, such as cars, telephones, and electricity, attracted crowds of people. The World War II demolished the city like a steamroller. Inhabitants, returning to their homes, found rubble and destruction. After the war, the former residents returned to Wrocław, as well as the new ones, to whom the post-war map of Poland gave a chance for a fresh start in life. A new border with Germany made Wrocław and Lower Silesia Polish again. My grandmother Leocadia settled here in 1945. She had 2 daughters. After the war, the former German residents left the city almost entirely. In those years, it was enough to occupy a flat or a house. No one questioned the property rights. Many buildings were destroyed, but my grandmother found something for her family. The rest is history. The post-war Wrocław experienced the good intentions of socialism, which tend to quickly lose a momentum. Be it due to lack of funds, corruption, or incompetence, many places in the city sprouted out with bizarre structures. Many of these concepts were interesting, but the end result was often pitiful. Just like those split-level apartments, the original concept was based on the modernist style of a French architect. The apartments inside are small, but the architect has managed to make them split-level. The residents have to run up the stairs to go to a bathroom. And finishing the facade was a different matter. In the times of socialism, it was not well taken care of, and the residents did not have money for masonry work. After switching to the private ownership system, the residents still could not come to an agreement as to appearance or color. As you can see, the facade is finally getting a facelift this year. Another strange piece of architecture of the socialist era is the Core and Ropes building. The structure has started with a central column or core. Plates of cement were added, creating individual floors. Then the corners of the plates were fastened with the steel ropes and anchored at the base of the building. This is how the Core and Ropes building was created. It was not the best solution, and the residents complained that the building was shaking and the walls were cracking. These problems were corrected in the 1970s by adding concrete and steel columns. These buildings at Grunwaldzki Square are another product of that era. These are 6 16-story buildings from the early 1970s. The project was built on a grand scale. In addition to the apartments in the high-rise buildings, a chain of shops and the service points was built downstairs. The skyscrapers were erected in a fairly windy place near the Oder River, close to a busy city highway. After a few years, dirt and mold penetrated the cement. My school friend lived in one of these buildings. The interiors were cramped and cold. And again, there was no energy or funds to complete the project. The skyscrapers did not receive the originally designed windows that wrap around the corners. Nobody in Poland could make them. The whole complex turned out to be a hideous concrete desert. Instead of interesting glass, the design was changed to the usual rectangular windows pressed into the buildings. As a result, the residents received comical 1-foot balconies. Wrocław today is a modern city with the comforts of the 21st century. The modern airport replaced the old terminal that could not stand up to the needs of today. It's still in use for private aircraft and freight. And as everywhere in the city, there is a gnome here. The new terminal took over the commercial flights. A futuristic shape of the Ibis Hotel stands in a spot previously used by an old bus terminal. The bus station was moved to the other side of the main train station of Wrocław. And here it is, a modern terminal, and of course the bus traveler gnome with his buddies. And this is my old school, where in the 1980s I found my passion for electronics. It's an interesting place. Behind the building there was a market hall before the war, one of two such halls in Wrocław. It was seriously damaged during the war and it was finally demolished in the early 1970s. When I went to school here, the market hall was already gone. Despite that, a tradition of trading continued to attract buyers and sellers. There were stalls and tables, and you could buy vegetables and fruit at the makeshift market. I said it was an interesting place because my school was closed in the 1990s and it was replaced by the local tax office. Look at how this place still attracts money in one way or another. The second market hall has survived to this day. It is a place where you can buy vegetables and other products. and of course there is a peculiar gnome nearby. The city limits today expand far beyond the center of town. The residential architecture of Wrocław includes such areas as Nowe Żerniki or Maślice. The modern housing was built here with all the comforts of the 21st century. When Poland joined the European Union, Wrocław received the financial aid for the development. That funding has attracted new young talent looking at modern solutions in architecture. This talent has rewarded Wrocław by a skyscraper called the Sky Tower. Until 2020, it was the tallest building in Poland. Sky Tower is visible from almost anywhere in Wrocław. It has 51 floors, and at 212 meters, it's an impressive achievement of the modern construction. You can find here luxury apartments, shops, offices, and conference rooms, and of course, an observation deck. Many places in the older neighborhoods still need help, such as moisture control or masonry work. The residents of Wrocław often substitute expensive repairs with their talent. These murals were created to add a little charm to forgotten and neglected courtyards in these old tenement houses. One of the most interesting places I found in Wrocław is the Neon Side Gallery. The organization collects these things and puts them here in this courtyard. Obsolete buildings, old cinemas, and market halls are being torn down. These neon signs are the history of Wrocław, and I'm glad it's not forgotten. Is that yet another bunch of gnomes? There is one more awesome neon in the city. It has survived for decades. Good Evening in Wrocław is a colorful neon welcoming visitors at the central train station. It's a cool neon at night, but in the daylight Wrocław is not only old and new architecture. The city would be nothing without its people. There is something special about them, a spark in their eyes I haven't seen anywhere else. Wrocław is a city of gnomes, the small and the large ones, those made of bronze, those painted on the walls, and those who are the future of this city. This was a nice view, but it was ruined by the sign pointing to the toilets. Sometimes the equipment decides not to cooperate. In these shots, the camera stabilizer was shaking uncontrollably, going wherever it wanted. And this is a beautiful rusty pole. What was I thinking? And these metal pipes didn't do any good for this shot. This escalator sequence didn't work on the way up or down. I forgot to turn the camera off, and I kept filming the sidewalk. These stained glass windows are no more. I'm not even sure why I pointed camera at this. And that's a bunch of noisy city traffic. Fascinating. Sometimes a crowd of people walks into a shot, like at this gallery. And sometimes a single person can ruin a shot. Thanks, Mom. This was a nice view, except for that graffiti on the wall. Too many cars parked randomly around this sculpture ruined the shot. We had to repeat this sequence in the afternoon. And this is the sign of the times we live in, the COVID-19 cleaning supplies.